For decades, the US dollar has been the undisputed king of the global economy. I mean, it's just the way things were. But what if I told you that its reign is facing its biggest challenge yet? Today, we're going to dive into these huge shifts happening in global finance, all driven by a powerful group of nations that are trying to build a whole new system from the ground up. So this is the big question, right? The one on everybody's mind in finance and geopolitics. Is the era of the all-powerful dollar actually, finally, coming to an end? Well, the signs are definitely pointing to a major transformation. And this number right here, this is one of the biggest signals we've got. According to the latest IMF data, the dollar's slice of the pie when it comes to global central bank reserves, well, it's dropped to a 25-year low. Now, that's not a collapse, not by a long shot, but it is a really clear trend. Something big is shifting just beneath the surface of the world economy. To really get what's happening now, we have to rewind the clock a bit. I mean, how did the dollar get so powerful in the first place? It really wasn't an accident. It was totally by design.
The dollar's dominance was basically built in 3 key steps. It all started back in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement. This deal made the dollar the world's anchor currency by linking it directly to gold. Then, in 1971, came the Nixon shock. President Nixon completely cut the cord to gold. From that moment on, the dollar's value was based purely on trust. Trust in the U.S. government and its economy. And for decades, that trust was unshakable. By 1999, the dollar was at its absolute peak, with over 71% of all global reserves held in greenbacks.
So for half a century, that foundation of trust seemed rock solid. But today, we're starting to see some pretty significant cracks appear. A growing number of countries are now actively, and I mean actively, looking for an exit ramp from this dollar-dominated system. You know, the investor Ray Dalio puts this moment into a really fascinating historical perspective. He argues this isn't some random event, but part of a predictable pattern he calls the big cycle. After studying 500 years of empires, he found this clear rhythm. The Dutch Empire rose and fell, then the British, then the US. His point is, these shifts in global power aren't the exception, they're the rule. And look, this isn't just a theory anymore. Countries are making real, concrete moves. They're starting to trade directly in their own currencies. They're swapping out their dollar reserves for things like gold. And, this one's crucial, they're building their own financial plumbing, creating alternatives to systems like SWIFT so they can get around US control.
So who's the main driver behind all this change? It's the BRICS nations. It started with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But now the group has gotten bigger, adding major energy players like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Together, they represent a massive chunk of the world's population and its economy. And they are not just talking. They are building a parallel financial universe. Seriously, for every major Western-led institution, the BRICS bloc is creating its own version. Their new development bank, that's their answer to the IMF and World Bank. And they're creating their own payment systems, like China's SIPs, to build a real alternative to SWIFT. If you want to see the shift in action, just look at the trade between Russia and China. Back in 2015, a whopping 90% of their business was done in US dollars. Fast forward to today, that number has plunged. Now, about half of their trade is done in their own local currencies. That's a gigantic change in a really short amount of time. Another huge pillar of the dollar's power has been the petrodollar system. Basically, it was an agreement that oil would be sold only in US dollars. This forced every country on Earth to hold dollars just to buy energy. But now, for the first time, that system is being seriously challenged. Saudi Arabia is talking about selling oil to China in yuan. India is already buying Russian oil in rupees. This is a direct hit on one of the key sources of dollar demand. And technology is just pouring fuel on this fire. These things called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are a total game changer. China's digital yuan, for example, could let 2 countries make direct, instant payments to each other, completely bypassing the dollar and the entire traditional banking system.
Okay, so after hearing all that, it might sound like the dollar is totally doomed. But, and this is a really big but, it's crucial to look at the other side of the coin. The dollar has some incredible, deeply rooted strengths that are not just going to vanish overnight.
For one, there's just simple inertia. In the massive world of foreign exchange, a staggering 85% of all daily trades still involve the US dollar on one side of the transaction. It's the default language of global finance. Trying to change that is a monumental task.
Another huge factor is debt. Roughly half of all international loans and bonds are issued in US dollars. This creates this powerful built-in demand. Everyone who owes that debt needs to get their hands on dollars to pay it back. You can't just flip a switch on trillions of dollars in obligations. And really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to trust. There is simply no other market in the world that can match the size, the liquidity, and the perceived safety of U.S. financial markets. When there's a crisis anywhere in the world, where does global money flee for safety? To the dollar. That hasn't changed.
So we've got this big push for change coming from the BRICS nations, and at the same time, this powerful pull from the dollar's existing dominance. What does all this mean when you put it together? What does the future of money actually look like? The key takeaway here isn't that the dollar is going to collapse. It's the rise of what experts call a multipolar currency system. So imagine a world where the dollar is still probably the most important currency, but it has to share the stage with a strong euro, a powerful Chinese yuan, and maybe a few others. It's a rebalancing, not a replacement.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Major financial institutions agree. This forecast from JP Morgan, for example, predicts the dollar will stay #1 for at least another couple of decades, but its overall share of global power is going to shrink. This is an evolution, not an overnight revolution.
So here's the bottom line. The dollar isn't collapsing, but it is facing real serious competition for the first time in nearly 80 years. We're shifting from a world that had one financial superpower to a world that's going to have several. And that leaves us with the most important question of all. As the rules of global money are being rewritten before our eyes, what happens next?